Our chair for this morning's session is mysteriously absent, so I'm now going to chair the session as well. So my name's Glen, for those of you who don't know me. And as chair of the session, my first duty is to introduce myself, Glen, and my first talk will be about lizard and invertebrate monitoring here in Hawke's Bay. But just before I get into that, I'll just for those of you who don't know, Landcare Research have recently had a bit of a rebranding exercise. So we're now going with our Māori name of Manaaki Whenua, which means look after the land. So I think that's a great initiative that we're leading with our Māori name from now on. Okay, so on to the topic of my presentation, and it's about the outcomes of predator control. So it's important not only to reduce the numbers of predators, but the whole reason that you're doing this is that you're looking for outcomes, improvements in biodiversity, or as people have been calling it, and I think I agree, I prefer the word nature. So we've been monitoring over the last several years the responses of native lizards and invertebrates to wide-scale predator control. Okay, so I'll start with just a quick overview of what I'm going to cover in this presentation. And the first thing that I want to emphasise is that we tend to focus a lot in New Zealand on the native birds, but predator control, of course, benefits other native flora and fauna as well. It's not all about birds. So native lizards and invertebrates occur widely in New Zealand, and they're not just in fenced sanctuaries and in wilderness areas. They're also in farms and urban areas, in people's backyards. And so these are the sorts of environments that we're focusing on in the two major predator control programs here in Hawke's Bay, which are Poutiri Ao Tāne and, of course, the Cape to City program. So I'll start off talking about Poutiri Ao Tāne, and we've seen some presentations about this project already in the last day, but just to quickly recap, is this pointer working? Yeah, there we go. This is just a very rough circle I've drawn around the approximate area where the wide-scale predator control is happening in Poutiri Ao Tāne. So it's about 50 or 60 kilometres northwest of us here in Napier. And I'm focusing on the predator control aspect of the project today, but it's important to remember that Poutiri Ao Tāne is not just predator control. It involves a number of work streams, including habitat restoration, like we've just heard about from Bruce, and reintroduction of various threatened species, including things like Cook's petrel. But the wide-scale predator control element of the project is taking place over about 6,000 hectares of what is predominantly farmland, although there are some significant fragments of native bush in there, and that is adjacent to Boundary Stream Reserve here, which is one of DOC's mainland island projects. So predator control began there in late 2011, and we started monitoring the native lizards and invertebrates just immediately before that predator control started, so in October of 2011. So this is just a map of the predator control effort that's going on in the area. So each of these dots here represents a kill trap which are out permanently in place. This pointer's very faint. Again, that's Boundary Stream Reserve there, which has had predator control going since the early 2000s. And also we have here a non-treatment area where there's no predator control going on, or at least there wasn't, there now is, for comparison, so that we can tell whether any changes we see in the predator control area are actually a result of predator control or whether they're just random variation. And these are some of the monitoring devices that we've been using up there. So firstly we have, most of you I'm sure will be familiar with tracking tunnels, but these are much larger than the small rodent tracking tunnels that many of you have probably used. These are designed for things like cats and mustelids, so they're actually about 1.5 metres long, and the opening is 20 by 20 centimetres, and we bait those with a piece of rabbit meat. So although we do pick up things like rodents, hedgehogs and weta and things in them, they're designed with predators in mind, cats and mustelids. And then we also have a lot of weta houses, which I'm sure, again, most of you are familiar with. Those pick up a range of different invertebrates, not just weta, and just very occasionally, when we're lucky, the occasional native lizard as well comes into the weta houses. So these are the changes we've seen over time while we've been monitoring in the area. And we've seen that trapping at this fairly broad scale and quite low cost predator trapping has made a measurable difference to the abundance of predators. So in our first monitoring session, predator control had not actually started yet, and we got similar levels of predator tracks in our tracking tunnels. Immediately afterwards, in the following summer, just a few months later, already we could see quite a substantial difference between our non-treatment area, where there's no predator control, and our treatment area. And it looks as though predator numbers actually increased here while they stayed the same in the non-treatment area. But what I think is the more likely explanation is that it took a little while for predators to become accustomed to these new devices out in their landscape. So initially they were quite reluctant to go into them. We got very few tracks in either area. And then I think by the second sampling period, once the tunnels had been in place for several months, we probably started to get a more realistic indication of what was actually there. So you're starting to see a difference with more predators in the non-treatment area. And as you can see, with the exception of just one trip here, there has consistently been a lot more predators in the non-treatment area than in the treatment area. So that's the first big tick. This wide-scale, low-cost predator control is actually reducing the number of predators, so it's working. But of course, as I said at the start, it's not about reducing the number of predators just for the sake of reducing them. We want to see a response in nature, in native species. So this graph shows the percentage of tracking tunnel lines that have detected native skinks since we started. And again, you can see here in the very first trip, we detected no skinks in either area. And then predator control started here just after the first sampling period. And already by our second sampling period, we started to pick up native skinks in the tracking tunnels, and we have done every trip since then. And the reason this graph is jumping up and down this way is it's just a seasonal effect. So these lower points are spring. The weather hasn't warmed up a great deal yet, so skinks are not very active yet. And you can see consistently in summer, we're getting quite a lot of skinks. In fact, up to half our tracking tunnel lines detecting native skinks. And by comparison, we've only ever detected skink tracks in one tracking tunnel in the non-treatment area over that entire 6 or 7 years that we've been monitoring. So a very substantial difference there. Looking at invertebrates now, we get all sorts of invertebrates in our weta houses, but the most common ones we see are both tree weta and cave weta. We also get a lot of spiders and cockroaches in there. And we've been seeing roughly 1 or 2 invertebrates per weta house over the period of the monitoring, and there hasn't actually been much of a difference between our treatment and our non-treatment area, with the exception, for some reason, of cockroaches. So we do have a significant difference. We're getting an average of 1.3 cockroaches per weta house, where predators are being controlled, and only 0.3 in the non-treatment area. So for some reason, it looks as though cockroaches are much more abundant in our treatment area. And as Rude mentioned yesterday, cockroaches are nature's recyclers. So presumably we're getting some restored ecosystem function along with this abundance of cockroaches. Come on. There we go. Okay, so that's the Poutiri Ao Tāne project, which is, as I said, has been running for 6 or 7 years now. Over the past 3 years, we've also started on the Cape to City program, which is much larger in scale. So Poutiri is 6,000 hectares of predator control. Cape to City is 26,000 hectares. And this map here just shows the predator control area, and it's broken up here into the area in the order in which predator control is being rolled out. So they began in the northern area. This pointer really is hopeless. They're currently doing knockdown control in the southern area in the green, and then next year will be control in the middle area to join up the dots, so to speak. So we started our monitoring before the predator control was rolled out, and we have 70 monitoring lines in the treatment area. So each of those purple dots you can see there is one of our monitoring lines. And what's not shown on this map, but just immediately to the west and southwest of the Cape to City area, we have another 50 monitoring lines that serve as our non-treatment for comparison. And this picture shows the various devices we're using to monitor native species. So you can barely see it here, but I'm sure you've all seen tracking tunnels before. There's a small tracking tunnel there for things like rodents, lizards, and weta. We have weta houses, and we also have things called tree wraps, which some of you may have seen before. These are designed for sampling geckos. So geckos will shelter underneath it. It's a sheet of high density foam just nailed onto the tree. You come along, peel the foam back and look underneath to see if there are any geckos sheltering under there. And we also get lots of invertebrates in those as well. We have artificial cover objects here for lizards. These are a stack of roof tiles, which because they get warm in the sun and they provide some shelter, skinks and geckos like to come and shelter in those, and you come and count them. And finally, we have these things here, which are frass funnels. And frass is just a fancy word for insect poo. So these are a mesh funnel underneath a tree, and canopy invertebrates will be pooing, and along with the leaf litter, their poo and also their eggs will be caught in this funnel, and it can give a very good measure of the relative abundance of arboreal invertebrates and also the species diversity. So you can identify a lot of these invertebrates either to order or to species based on their poo or their eggs. So a whole range of different monitoring methods that we're using, and that started in 2015. So we've been going for two and a bit years now. So it's quite early days. As I said, the predator control is actually still being rolled out at the moment. So it's too early to expect to see any difference between the predator control area and the non-treatment. But what is very encouraging so far is that the devices we're using are detecting all the different types of critters that we were hoping to detect. So we're getting skinks, geckos, tree and cave weta, cockroaches, spiders, and we're seeing them at very similar relative abundances in both areas. So there don't seem to be any pre-existing differences between the Cape to City area and the non-treatment, which is good. So hopefully that means if we start to see any differences, it's a result of the predator control, not just because one area was inherently better than the other or whatever. Okay, so I'll wrap up now with just a quick discussion of what all this means in terms of management in Cape to City. So what we've seen is that through the Poutiri Ao Tāne results, we've shown that this wide-scale, low-cost predator control can give us a meaningful, measurable reduction in the numbers of feral cats and mustelids in the landscape. And we also saw rapid recovery of native skinks. So we haven't seen across-the-board recovery in all sorts of native species, but certainly a dramatic difference in skinks and also an apparent difference in some of the invertebrates. So very, very encouraging results. The Poutiri Ao Tāne project is only looking at the larger predators, the cats and mustelids. Of course, if we had rodent control in there as well, we might expect to see a lot more difference in things like skinks and native invertebrates. And as part of the Cape to City program, there are some areas that are having rodent control in addition to the larger predator control. So in those areas, we might see some really, really good recovery of native fauna. So, as I say, it's early days yet in Cape to City, but watch this space, and hopefully in another year or two's time, we'll be reporting similar dramatic increases in native lizards and invertebrates in Cape to City. Okay, thank you.